Welcome in Food for Thought. I'm Karen Nodrick, and my guest today is Seth Dellinger. Hi, Seth. And we will be talking about the art of connection. I met Seth through the practices offered by Reiki Foundation. So Seth has a number of projects that are happening, and I invited Seth to tell a little bit more.
Well, yeah, the Art of Connection, which you participated in, is a 5-day training that I've run a couple of times now. And it's basically looking at how do we interact with each other. And so in terms of things out there in the world that people may have already encountered and recognized, we could say that the Art of Connection involves what's known as authentic relating and also embodiment practices. And so I have a fair amount of background in both of those things, but what's interesting, I find, is that when you combine them in the way that I do, which in my experience is just sort of natural, I'm just taking what I have and putting it together, it does result in something that I haven't quite encountered just in authentic relating or just in embodiment. So the idea is like, I have a certain experience of being in my body, but then suddenly when I'm with you, I can't help but have a new experience of my own body. And then when you say something to me that I love hearing, or you say something that upsets me, or you say something very interesting, for each one of those situations, there's a bodily response. And then that's just describing what it's like for us to be together. But then, as I mentioned, it's like your presence, but then you say something. So the words we use are constantly evoking experiences. I mean, I could just say something like tree. I see this painting with trees behind you, but there's a tree that comes into your mind, maybe because you went for a walk this morning in the trees. I don't know, but that's just a simple example. But the words are like, it's like we're tossing images at each other, right? And then if we actually want to talk about relationship, this is where we might bring in not only embodiment, but another word is mindfulness, right? I'm aware of what I'm doing. And so it's like, when I speak to you, am I aware of the impact of my words? And of course, I don't know really what the impact of my words on you is unless you tell me. But part of like what we did in Art of Connections, we begin to tell each other, when you said that, I felt this. And then, when someone tells you that, suddenly it's like they've revealed something that was invisible. And so the Art of Connection, another way of looking at it, is just like a musician who wants to play a beautiful, complex piece of music. They slow it down and they play short passages until it's very easy, and then later they can speed it up and also add their emotions and do everything. Part of the practices like the embodiment practices or authentic relating practices, they take a little fragment of life and they expand it and they slow it down, so that we talk every day, we interact with other people all the time. But if we have a conversation, we say, wait, let's slow this down and let's even talk about what it feels like for us to be talking to each other at this moment. It's an unusual thing to do, but it starts to reveal to us, oh, this is what happens in my body when I feel close to someone, or this is what happens when I feel embarrassed. And we start to notice those things, so that tomorrow when we're just at work and we're having a conversation, our awareness has been nourished and just it starts to make everyday life maybe illuminated in a new way. So that's one of the projects, the Art of Connection.
I really like that art of connection experience. And I think there are some videos on Facebook, I think, available, or will you be putting it away from there? I don't know.
The videos were available for participants, and they kind of disappear after a while. But anyone who's curious about that, there are other ways to get involved with those practices that we could talk about.
I read somewhere that people spend most of their time, their default time, ruminating about future and past, not being in the present moment.
Mhm.
Even when they talk to another human being in a conversation, they're like thinking about the past still, or doing a shopping list, whatever. Like they're not fully present.
Mhm.
And knowing that, paying attention to that, kind of changed my way of conversing with people. I catch myself, like, of course, instead of being here in the moment, I very often am busy catching myself escaping somewhere else.
Right.
And what I noticed in the art of connection practices, it's you are so preoccupied on finding out the information, on hearing the other person. How did that make you feel? And it's actually interesting. How did that make you feel? And like, you have to paraphrase what the person just said. Like when I heard you say that, and you either repeat or say it similarly, like you have to pay attention. This is the practice of paying attention to the present moment. I knew that it is theoretically possible, but once you actually embody it, totally different experience.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and I appreciate how you describe that, because people are, these practices like authentic relating practices or the art of circling. I ran a program, called it the art of connection, but they're all in this world of bringing mindfulness and awareness and intention to conversation, right? And I think this is new in the world, these practices, although it's not new in many ways. I mean, people for forever have had conversations.
It's recycled.
Yeah. But in terms of, like, I don't know, I can go online and I can find a program like the Art of Connection and I can sign up and go and do it. I think that's somewhat new. But as you were describing, what happens with the practice of presence is that I notice that I'm not present. As you say, I catch myself and then I come back. And that in and of itself is the practice. But people who are familiar with meditation know all about that. I'm focused on my breath, and then I realize I'm not, and then I come back to my breath. So, yeah, I mean, I once knew someone who taught meditation, and they just, taught that kind of thing for a while. And then they just said, and another form of meditation is to pay attention to the person you're with and keep coming back to the person every time you drift away. And it's, it is in that sense. But the thing about meditation is, I sit on the cushion, I close my eyes. The breath that I'm paying attention to is coming from my body. So there's a way that something's predictable. And, usually I'm going to pick a place that's quiet and there's not going to be other disturbances. When I'm with another person, I have no idea what they're about to say. I have no idea what they're about to do. I mean, I can make predictions, and if I know you really well, my predictions might be, better. But even if I do know you very well, maybe you had some crazy experience this morning and you're in a completely different mind space than you were yesterday. And when we meet, you're going to say something I can't. So then I think that, I think what I'm trying to say is the demand on your attention to stay present with another person can be very challenging. Even though we do it every day, what we do is we do a version of relating to another person, but it falls way short of the kind of attention that we could be bringing to those conversations.
profound in a way. I wanted to ask you about positive stories that you observe, or perhaps you observed some negative stories. So people who practiced the art of connection for quite some time.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I run a 16-week program that also has the word connection in it. It's grounded connection. But this is a program where we do embodiment practices, we do meditation practices, and like the art of connection, we come together and do interactive practices. And we sort of notice how all these practices are in relationship with each other. And so there's one of the participants in that program in a recent call. We had a conversation together and she volunteered to sort of share her experience. And so we were exploring with her. And she said, I want to talk about something that's really hard. And so, one of the things that we do is I think maybe is already clear from the conversation we're having, is we take our time. So the first question wasn't, well, what's the thing that's really hard? It was like, oh, what's it like to talk about something that's hard to talk about? So we explore that first, right? And then she noticed, she says, well, here when I'm with all of you, there was a group of us, she says, it feels soft here. But what I want to talk about is hard, right? And so eventually we came to the story, and it was that she had been in a training that she does. She's involved with dance, and she was in this training. It was very creative, and she felt wonderful, and she's, having beautiful thoughts. But then she went on break, and a friend had given her some nuts that she likes, and she starts eating them. And she had already had lunch, and she was full, but she's eating them. And then at a certain point, she just sort of thought, I don't know why I'm doing this. But then she kind of got angry and decided, well, I'm going to keep doing it. And then she went and bought more kind of food at the store. And she was almost at war with herself. She was like, in a weird way, like ruining the experience she had just been having. And she doesn't know why she's doing it. So she brought this to us, and she said, well, I have this whole history of, when I was feeling badly, I would turn to food. And so, it's a story that we recognize, but it was very difficult, right? And she, as part of telling us the story, she actually broke down into tears, and we stayed with her and we listened and we kind of explored it. Some of us shared what it was like to be with her while she was crying, to see that she was willing to reveal that emotion in front of us. And so we had this whole conversation, but when we got to the end, it's interesting. There was another thing that came up, but what she started saying was, we've been talking about this thing that's hard, but because there's this softness here in the group, I was able to do it. And what I'm noticing is like, that's hard, and it's hard to look at. It's hard to turn towards it. But now that I'm turning towards it, I'm seeing so many things that I couldn't see, because normally it's difficult and I turn away, right? And so she even started noticing, those things that I don't want to look at, they're filled with insight for me. And she even started, and she's been doing this kind of work for several months now. And she said, I've been thinking about this, like the things that I feel uncomfortable with, if I'm willing to stay a little longer, they're actually places that can be a place of discovery, right? So this is an example, just to your question, of like how I think we can come to a new place, partly through these practices. And what she said about, it's hard, but being with all of you, I feel softer. I think that was very important, because there is often a limit to what I can understand by myself. But then when I come and I'm with you, or I'm with a group of people, and I share what's happening for me, and the others respond, they're going to respond with something that I hadn't seen. It hadn't occurred to me. So it's a way of just we use each other as mirrors and as new perspectives.
It occurred to me as I heard you relate the story, that the problem was not eating or the nuts, the problem was the why. And the beginning of confronting the why was this happening was just noticing the fact of eating the nuts and making that choice. I know I don't need to do it, but then I went and doubled down on it. So I know there is something I shouldn't do, but then I doubled down on the thing I shouldn't do. That's the relatable insight for me. For example, it's like doing it anyway, but doing it worse. And why? And the tears, like, to be honest, the nuts, it's just one lunch. It's okay. It will end up, in sewage somehow. But the why is the relevant part, not only for her, but for everybody else in the room. Like, it's a relatable story. And I knew exactly what she felt, even though I don't have the same problems. On the surface. On the surface, not. Because our internal pain has different ways of manifesting itself. And the bravery of admitting it to yourself, and then there is this kind of due diligence somehow. No, not the due diligence, what do I say? Accountability thing, when you admitted it to others, it gets you, somehow it implies that you will work on it. The moment you admit it to yourself and on top of that to others, it puts some sort of oppression on you to work on it. Amazing. I will totally cut out that absolutely uncomfortable silence that we will, and then I will write, this went on for 10 minutes.
Well, it's funny you said that. So in one of my trainings, one of the things that they would have us do is we would be on, this was on Zoom, but we would go in a breakout room and we would not speak. And they would give us a minute to be with the other person. And in fact, they would prepare us. So we'd be in a big Zoom screen with, 20 people, but they would tell everyone, they'd say, Seth, you and Kara are going to be in the breakout room. And so you can start looking at each other now. And they would walk us through and they'd say, zoom in, zoom out, notice the background, notice what thoughts are coming, notice if it gets uncomfortable, if you want to look away. And then they say, look away for a moment. Oh, thank God. And you say, okay, now come back. And like, there's a whole dance we do there. Like if we were just, let's say in a city on a public transportation, we get on a bus and you're sitting across from me and you look interesting and maybe we could have a conversation, but then again, you're just a stranger. And so we're doing that dance, sometimes. And sometimes we decide to speak and like maybe we become friends and like it change, or maybe we just look at each other and then someone gets off the bus and that's it, So yeah, in that moment, I mean, I just had the sense you might have more to say, but what was interesting in listening to you and watching you, and so when I say listen, often listen, we think of our ears, but listening in my experience, especially in my embodiment, my movement training through the Feldenkrais method, that's often a word that means pay attention. So, but as I was listening to you, I was also seeing you. And when you spoke about how her story related to you, and you, like, there was even a moment's like the nuts, I don't, but that thing of I'm almost realizing that I'm deliberately doing something that's bad for me and I make the decision to keep doing it. And why do I do that? It's like your eyes came into this focus and I could see like, yes, you are living that in your body on some level. And this is why when this woman tells the story, everyone who's present has an experience. I mean, we put the attention with her, but it's revealing something about being human. And then we all get reminded of something, below the level of our personalities and our manicured appearances. Oh yeah, I sometimes do something that I know is bad for me. Why do I do that?
Really relatable. I was thinking about. I completely lost now. I had the thought, but then I was in the moment listening to you, and oh yeah, I forgot. I remembered now.
I was about to
So
ask you what it's like to be totally lost.
my real laughter. I have a friend who put my actual laughter as a ringtone, and I was not amused.
You were not amused?
No.
I
Like
imagine
my actual real laughter sounds like the witch being tortured. Like it's
that's fun. That's fantastic.
so I wanted to confess,
Mm.
like while I have you on the camera, and I hope people from the Art of Connection can see it. So there was a moment where you said, being a person to look at, like on a big screen, and I first pinned a friend that I used to, so I know him. I actually know him, and then I was like, I don't know. I still don't like to look at my friend. So I just like pinned no one. I almost like would look into the blackness, and then I would feel comfortable. Not looking at anyone, feeling, not mirroring. Somebody said, "Oh, I mirrored the person I looked at." No, none of that. I would just look in the darkness. But not to make anybody offended, I straight out said, "Oh no, no, I was just not mirroring. I was not mirroring on purpose." I don't know why I did that. Like I don't know why I had to make up like a little explanation
Yeah, it's
just to make
interesting. It's
people
like
comfortable.
what was proposed as a group activity was uncomfortable on some level. And it's interesting too, because it's like what I said, just looking at someone else on the Zoom screen and making it big, pinning them so you don't have all the little squares. It's just asking you to do the same thing as you and I are doing right now. We're looking at each other, but it kind of amplifies it. And then later, of course, no one knew what the other people were doing, but there was this need you felt to explain something that no one actually knew about in the first place. Because if you hadn't have spoken, also no one would have. But it's interesting how we relate to a group. We want to, at the same time, it's like I don't want to do what everyone's doing right now, but I want to be part of the group. Does that capture it a little, or
It captured, but there is another problem I had with it.
huh?
When I look at people, I like them to know I'm looking at them.
Yeah.
In a way, there is this direct conversation, but then you're like, they will not know you're looking at them. I was like, well, then it's not interactive. It's me spying on them. And I felt uncomfortable, as if I'm invading their privacy.
Right.
Like I had all that, so let's say this proposed practice invited my shadows to come out. Like on one hand, I could totally spy on everybody, but on the other hand, so apparently there is something in me that resonated with that. And that was interesting.
It makes me think that I could do that again, but I could actually say, what's it like to spy on people? Do you ever spy on people? Because I think, again, if we're sitting on the bus, maybe I'm looking at you, not to meet your eyes, but I'm just spying and wondering about you and, spying on him and her. And, we do that.
The whole newspaper.
Yeah. I'll tell you just a brief story that came to mind just now. It's because the thing is, you're talking about what was uncomfortable, right? But part of the practice is, how do the things that make us uncomfortable inhibit us from living the way we want to live, in a sense, right? So I had an experience recently. I go dancing, right? And there's this, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called 5 Rhythms. There's a woman named Gabrielle Roth who created this modality, which is, it's basically a dance party, but the idea is don't wear any shoes, don't drink alcohol or do drugs before you get here. And it's not about how you look. You can do anything and no one judges you. And, you know, people probably do judge you in their head, but the idea is that it's supposed to, you don't have to look good, right? You just go and move any way you want. If you want to crawl around the floor, you can do it, right? So I was there and I was dancing. And of course, in my head, I was wondering, what do people think about how this looks? And, you know, I had this thing. But then I just realized I was doing that, right? I sort of caught myself, as you were saying before. And then I said, okay, since I'm already thinking about this, can I make it into an experiment? So I kept dancing and I closed my eyes and I imagined like a million faces all around me, like as if I was in one of those stages that the audience is all around and there was a spot. I just imagined everyone staring at me. And I sort of, it's in my imagination, but I thought, how does this feel? And then if it was started to feel uncomfortable, then I imagined all the faces are friendly. All the faces are looking at me with love, like they think I'm great. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I said, is that really how it is? And then I made all the faces angry. And I made, what does my body feel like now? How do I dance now? And then I said, okay, now they all disappear and there's no one here. And it's just me in the middle of the darkness and no one can see me. And what I just noticed was each one of those provoked a different response from me. And so it got to a place of like, can I actually choose the response? And I'm actually in a room full of people and most of them are dancing and not looking at what other people are doing. Most people are, you know, but it just helped me to see that part of what's happening like right now is you're looking at me and you might be thinking about something. But another thing that's happening is I'm making up in my head what you're thinking about me, right? I'm making up in my head that you're bored or you're interested or you're like, I don't actually know what the story is, but we make it up. So the thing is to notice like what I'm making up is having an impact on me. And if we go back to the art of connection, I could just ask you like, what's it like for you? And then if you know, are willing to tell me, then it's like, oh, now I really know where I stand with you.
Can I ask your advice on something? A person I am interacting with who doesn't have that knowledge you do. That person knows exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, he thinks he knows because that's the way he's bred. Like he knows exactly what I'm thinking. He knows exactly behind each smile I have. He knows she's laughing at me. Like he already has all this list of implicit behavior on my part.
Right.
And that person acts on that, but it's not true.
Right.
And yet that person still acts on that.
Right.
I wanted to ask, how does practice that you have help people like that? Just help to break out of this idea that I know exactly what is happening with that person in front of me, why they are acting the way they're acting. This is very important. Like, I love what you just said.
Well, so that's what we would call projection, right? He's projecting on you. She's angry right now. And I'm imagining, like, if you were to tell him I'm not angry, would he just disbelieve you?
No, he would call me a liar. Yes, so like you straight out lie. I know you're angry. Like this is the main cause of the fight, the projections.
Yes, yes. Well, that's very difficult. And I've been in that experience. I was in a long-term relationship where I was regularly told how I feel. And I would say, no, that's how you think I'm feeling. And I think I would know. Or I was sometimes told, well, you said last week these things, and therefore it shows how you feel. And it's like, that shows something I said last week. It doesn't show how I feel right now. You know, if someone is really strongly in that place and they're not interested, the problem is what happens is now you're having a discussion about whose version of reality is correct and whose version of reality is incorrect. There's when I did the I'm looking, I don't see it. I have a book that I held up to the screen during the Art of Connection, which is called Difficult Conversations.
Mhm.
And what it says is no matter what kind of conversation we're having that's difficult, there's only 3 difficult conversations, really. The first one is, what really happened? So something happened, and I've got my understanding of what happened, and you've got your understanding of what happened. And we can argue forever about that, right? The second difficult conversation is, what kind of a person are you? And, because you said such a thing to me, so it proves that you're this kind of person. And it's like, no, I'm not that kind of person. The reason I said that is because I'm this kind of person. So we have a disagreement. And this sounds kind of like what's going on with this person you're talking about. He's got you figured out. You are this kind of person. And you're saying, no, I'm not that kind of person. I'm another kind of person. The third difficult conversation is how we feel. And the key thing is, whose feelings are more important? It's like, well, you say that you felt, sad, but I feel angry. And, my way of seeing things is correct. And so my anger is more important than your sadness, right? So we have to actually be able to sidestep all of those things and sort of say something like, wow, that's interesting. For you, it appears that I'm this kind of person, while I don't have that experience at all. Isn't it interesting that we see things differently? And then if you can do that, you start talking about something that's out there. Like if you can, because potentially you can agree with him, and potentially he can agree with you that we don't have the same opinion. So it's funny, like there's that phrase, let's agree to disagree. Usually that just means let's drop the subject. But you can agree that there's a disagreement without dropping the subject and then explore, but it really does depend on the other person also being willing. It's very difficult. And it sounds like the person you're referring to might not have a lot of flexibility. But that's the invitation. If that person were to get interested in communication and want to come to something like an authentic relating class and explore, well, then you can get into those different layers. But it sounds to me like it's just true for him that what he thinks about you, is whatever he thinks. That's just the truth. And so when you say something different, he's like, don't tell me the sky isn't blue. I can see that you're angry, And it's like, well, you can see what you think is anger, but, it's difficult. That's a very difficult situation.
And I think it's so universal.
Mhm.
People live through that, being
Yeah.
misunderstood. Like I named it on my YouTube channel, like that one of the first, I'm trying to understand people. Because there is a reason for why I'm trying to understand people.
Right.
I had been misunderstood, and I know what it feels like. I
Mhm.
know what it feels like.
Right.
It's like it's alienating. You feel
Yes.
alone. The moment
Right.
you are felt misunderstood, you feel alone.
Right.
And when somebody whom you care about misunderstands you like that, and you can't protect yourself, like each time you protect yourself, you are called a liar.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like a small version of being put in jail for a crime that you didn't commit.
oh, imagine being punished for this. So it's
Yeah.
even worse, like
Right.
punitive actions
Right.
while being innocent, let's say.
Right. And it's really difficult. Like before we were recording, we were talking about some of what's happening in the world right now. And you were talking about having grown up in Ukraine, and also just with what's happening there, how they're children. They're just learning about the world, but they're learning right away what it means to be Russian, what it means to be Ukrainian. So let's say that one of these children grows up and they move to another part of the world, and then they meet a Russian there, and neither of them are in a war zone, and they're just two people meeting. But then this is the difficulty, because one of them or both of them might be 100% sure they know what the other person stands for or what they represent in the world, and yet they're not in the war zone. They're in a different context altogether. So they're going to have to. There's a humility that we have to have. Another word that comes up in these practices is vulnerability. Like, I open myself, or as one of my teachers would say, I say something to you and I have no idea what's going to happen after I say it. So that's the sort of, I expose myself. I become a little more naked. And of course, that's the image we use of something that can be humiliating, right? Like, I suddenly, like, in the schoolyard, some kid pulls down the other kid's pants. It's humiliating, right? And suddenly everyone can see me and I'm naked and I have to cover myself, right? But there's also, when we say what's really true about what's happening inside of ourselves, that's voluntary, right? It's not someone else exposed me. It's like, I'm telling you how I feel. And yet, when I tell you how I feel, I don't know what your response will be. And so, for like the person you were speaking about before, who has his ideas about you, it might be very difficult to say, maybe I was wrong. And yet this is at the heart of what is necessary for people who have different life experiences to be able to connect at a certain point. We have to be willing to admit, I don't know everything. I certainly don't know about your experience. We have to actually give back to each other the full authority of, Kara knows way better than I do what it's like to be Kara. Like, I have to give that back to you. But yeah, it's true. We get trained, our parents will tell us, see that person, see how they're acting, that's such and such a kind of person. And, on some level, that's a helpful thing a parent does. They're trying to orient their child to the world, but we also have to be willing to question what we think we know.
Do you think it's evolutionary for people to forego the actual process of discovering who other people are and projecting their previous experiences, to simplify that? So they will just very quickly use the pattern recognition techniques to fit the person into a narrative, into a doll, and not go through a long process, because discovering who other people are, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. The way we relate to other people is a habit. And definitely we know about bad habits, but if we didn't have any habits, we couldn't feed ourselves. I mean, we need to have certain things that are, so if I see a child, I don't have to remember how to relate to children. I go into talking to child mode, which is different than talking to adult mode. And if I know you really well, I've heard that story. I know what happened to you last summer, and we can just refer to that. So, and that can allow us to talk about something new, or as we say, we can go deeper into our relationship because we've already covered those other things. But yeah, when you go to the store, the person who takes your money, there's a way that's a habitual, interaction. And at the same time, the person who takes your money and smiles at you and wishes you a good day and you actually feel it, that's like someone breaking the habit a little bit. And sometimes it wakes us up. So it's, we've talked, we've mentioned a couple times John Vervaeke, or at least once. That's how you and I know each other. He's always talking about, in many different realms of human experience, two opposites And then he has this phrase about opponent processing. So we
I
go
did the
from one
episode
to
on
the
that
other.
to explain
Yeah,
the
yeah.
process.
Well, it's like,
It's a necessary process, actually.
yeah, we go back and forth, but
Mhm.
then hopefully what happens is what he'll refer to as the interpenetration of the two, right? So it's like, I know how to be, I know how to talk, but I also know how to be silent. I talk, but I don't need to talk. I'm silent, but I don't need to be silent. In each moment, is talking the way to go right now, or is silence the way to go? Or even as I talk, this is a little of a metaphor, but just think of like how I'm using my voice right now, like how much silence is in my talking, or how much does my silence speak? I can, so that gets metaphorical, but you can understand that there is something that isn't just pure abstraction that we're talking about. There's a listening that it just goes to another level. Once we've made the distinction between sound and silence, then we can say, what's beyond that? What's beyond that? So in any case, you mentioned the habits, and that's really just one more thing that John talks about is he talks about I think he likes to talk about his aunt and uncle, but a married couple who know each other for a long time. In a certain way, they've memorized who the other person is, and there's just things they can do automatically. Like, I don't know, I wake up in the morning and I make coffee and I prepare your coffee and I already know how you like your coffee, right? But then you say something that surprises me and reminds me that you're still a mystery after all this time, and those things are both true at the same time.
I was thinking the value of discovering what is the mystery. Why do we need not to rely with the people we know for a long time, for example, not to rely on pattern recognition, but actually going into right now, here, discovering the nuances, this constant curiosity. Why is that important? Like, I know that it's important. I just
yeah,
don't know
right.
why.
Well, we had a funny discussion before about a class I led where people were asked to touch their feet, and you were telling me how
to all the feet lovers.
Yeah, right. Well, and I had no idea, but you were telling me that for some people it's actually very uncomfortable to touch their feet, and it was on Zoom and other people might see them. But what I was saying to you is, most of us don't know our feet very well. We put them in shoes, and our feet are actually very complex and they're part of our bodies. And, if anyone ever banged their toe, how much misery can happen when your foot isn't happy, right? And so what did we do in that class? We did something unusual. For some people, it sounds like it was very much outside of their habits, and they were touching their feet and pulling on their toes and doing these things. I love that. It's just thinking about it. You're because I know you're remembering also.
I'm touching my feet at the moment. So
oh, perfect. I love that. But someone who's listening right now to our conversation, they might suddenly be feeling their feet right now, and they weren't before. And even that, you might say, more of them is alive in that moment. So, yeah, I don't know. It just reminded
touch your
me
feet, people.
Come on,
know your feet. Find out exactly every single of the 26 bones that your feet comprised of.
Right. And this was part of my training. I mean, I have this skeleton over here.
Oh my God, I just know.
Yeah. You didn't see the skeleton? Yeah. Well, I believe when I taught the class, I brought a skeleton leg over, and I was showing the foot and all the bones. One of my teachers told me how, in some schools they invite parents or grandparents to come in and talk about what they do. So she was a Feldenkrais teacher, and she went to her granddaughter's class, and they're like, just little kids, like 5 years old, something like this. So she brought the skeleton and she said to the kids, all of you have one of these on the inside of your body. And they had this whole conversation, you know.
Oh no. Again, just show that to a child, like you have that inside your body. Talking about traumas.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, yes, you would really have to think about what, I suppose, what is the experience of these children. But I think, you know, we also have in the United States, in 2 more weeks, we have Halloween, which is this
Oh, yeah.
holiday where people dress up and, you know, like ghosts or skeletons, and they walk around and then they give the kids candy. I mean, it's sort of a consumer version of something that used to be more like communication with people who've passed on to, you know, after death. But I don't know. It's. I'm trying to remember the original thing that you were asking about, but it was something like, you know,
That's
getting
actually
to
your
know
own
in more.
point.
What's that?
That you're on point. It's getting to know yourself and knowing that
Right.
inside you there is this skeleton over there that I have in the corner.
Right.
Like one of that, like
Right.
this getting to know, and then you look at the other person, and like inside that person is the skeleton. But let me learn a little bit more about the nuances that are building that skeleton, or like
Right.
build around the skeleton or something.
Well, I think we were saying before also that when we meet someone who's different than us, you know, in many, many ways, one of the most obvious things that's the same is that they have a human body, just like we do. So if that person says, oh, I had something bad for lunch and my stomach hurts, like we understand that. We might not understand a lot about that person, but they have an experience in their body. And, you know, it's Moshe Feldenkrais, who created the Feldenkrais method. He wrote a book about, of course, his method. And the name of the book is The Elusive Obvious. So it's like the thing that's so obvious that we don't look at it, right? And so that's what these practices do. The Feldenkrais method, often it's doing a very simple movement, but doing it slowly and paying a lot of attention. You know, the practices that we did in the Art of Connection were like slowing down the conversation to notice all of the things happening under the surface, all of the sensations or all of the thoughts. So, and I think that's what meditation is too. We breathe all day long. You know, our focus goes here and goes there all day long. And so we say, well, let's slow it down and let's notice the breathing and focus in one place. But it's really just paying attention to something that's always happening, but isolating it, slowing down. And of course, we can pay attention to things that we might discover after paying attention to something for an hour. I think I just wasted an hour of my time. Like it might be really unimportant, but our bodies, you know, our thinking, those are things that we get used to ignoring, but they're actually quite important, right? And my body doesn't seem to me to be very important while I'm healthy, but the moment I get sick, it's like, wow, there's nothing more important than my body right now, because all those important things I had to do, just forget about it. I can't get out of bed, you know?
The not paying attention part is we are conditioned not to pay attention to the thing we have too much of, like breath. It's just there.
Mm-hmm.
The skeleton inside. We are not paying attention to the skeleton inside of us. It's just there. The feet, we are not paying attention. They are there. And how far does it go where we are not paying attention to what is here? Like the hour, it's here. We're still in the hour. It's not wasted, it's there. Let's pay attention to that. What does it teach us? The only reason why things like that can go, let's say, wasted, like our breath, is that we never acknowledge the importance of it. Because like we are the ones who decide what is important. And the moment we decide to touch our food, and to pay attention to it, to every one of the 26 bones. Thank you for teaching me that trivia. We make those things valued and important. And
Right.
feet are fascinated to me. Their roots, they are what connects us to ground. If we were trees, feet would be the roots that kind of take the juice from the earth. It's important to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good what you said, that what we pay attention to, we're giving value to it. And I mean, one of the things that was maybe one of the most important things I learned in practicing the Feldenkrais method was, just like I can move my arm, just like I can move my leg, I can move my attention. And of course, we're moving our attention all the time, but it's often like because our phone showed us a notification. So it's more like we get pulled. So to actually ask the question, what do I want to do with my attention right now? I think I'll put it here. What's that like? Oh, that revealed this to me. That gave me something, but I don't think it's very useful. I'm going to put my attention here. I could keep my attention here a long time. And the longer I stay here, the more, because, like the painting behind you, if I were to look at it for a minute, I would notice something. But if I would look at it for 10 minutes, I would notice so much more, right? So it's just this investment of time. And I guess what I would say is, with one more reference to John Vervaeke, the problem is there's an infinite number of things you can pay attention to. He talks about combinatorial explosion, not only all the things I could look at, but all the memories I could bring up, all the things I could think, all the different associations. But I think what becomes possible is you can get to a place where just the general act of paying attention to whatever it is that comes in, and the capacity to have some choice, so that I'm walking down the street and I understand that I have choice about what I pay attention to, and then I can be deliberate. I think it can take us to that place of wonder, right? And this is what I would say, like in my own practice with embodiment, or people use the word somatics, one of the biggest shifts for me is I was raised in a family that was basically atheist, right? So if you're atheist, there is no God. And if there is no God, you're going to die and that's it. And if you're going to die and that's it, how does that change what's meaningful to you, right? And one very easy place to go is, well, what would be meaningful is to eat as much delicious food as I can, to have all kinds of bodily pleasures and everything. But, my time is running out. And so I've got to get stuff. I got to get as much of this stuff that I can get. And none of it's transcendent. It's only here and now. And so because of many things I could talk about, but it would take a long time, I eventually sort of dropped first just being anti-religious. I got rid of that at a certain point by meeting people who were just beautiful people and they happen to believe in God. And do I have to keep assuming that they're crazy because they believe in God? Like they seem like a wonderful person. But there was a moment in my life where I had to, as we talked about before, I had to let go of that, because to me it was true that if you went to church, you were somehow a little bit crazy. That was a truth for me at one point in my life. So I let go of that. And then I will never forget, there was a day when I was meditating and I wasn't feeling very happy. There was some difficulties I was looking at. And at the end of the meditation, I felt calmer because of the meditation, but I was still sort of left with all the difficulties. And I just said, please. And I didn't know who I was talking to. But then I noticed it and I kind of said, who are you talking to? And I realized I'm talking to someone as if someone exists. And I didn't use the word God or anything, but I let go of something there. And I'll tell you, my whole body changed, right? And so what you could say is, without being too specific, it's like I let go of a certain worldview that I had. And then from that point on, I had more freedom of movement. I had more freedom to walk through the woods and I don't know, feel poetic about the trees or wonder what the tree is thinking, which might seem, oh, trees don't think. It's like, well, maybe they do, maybe
Yes,
they
we
don't,
do.
but I could wonder if they think, and just wondering, I'll feel something that I couldn't feel before. So it's like, anyway, this is a long way of saying it, but I think just paying attention can become almost like a transcendent experience in that way. And then if I'm with another person, like this would be the real highest level. Maybe I'm with that person, like you mentioned, who's telling me how I feel. And if I would actually be capable of being super curious about that, like, wow, that's amazing. You think you know how I feel. I wonder how that happened, rather than just, which is so natural, telling them that's not how I feel, but to even be able to transcend that, I'll still probably decide this is not the person I want to spend all my time with. But while we're together, if I can even just get curious about that, who knows that? Because for sure, if I do that, I'll probably respond to them in a way they've never been responded to. They're so used to this version of communicating. Anyway, I'm going in many directions now, but I do think that our attention is miraculous when we actually see what it does and we begin to sort of consciously make use of our attention.
Thank you, Seth. It was wonderful to hear you speak and to relate to all the open questions that I still had. People, please check out the project that Seth has. I put the links below. Worth it. I recommend it. And also check out Seth's YouTube channel. We did not speak about that, but it's just, I guess, free lectures that Seth gives. And yeah, like, subscribe, support. And I would like to express gratitude to my today's sponsors, which is Free Time and Free Time. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate, I think what I was just talking about, I see it in you. There is a kind of a wonder and a curiosity which you bring, which makes it really just really rich, kind of delicious to be in conversation with you. Appreciate that. I'll just mention, I can send you information to share, but one thing I'm putting together, and I can have it ready in time, is there's a practice that we did during the Art of Connection, which is, I think, a nice way for someone to get present in any situation. And I described it as the presence mantra. You know what I'm talking about. But I'll give you a link where people can actually have some recordings, some guidance about the presence mantra. So it's a practice that just helps you get present in any situation. And I'd love to share that.
I appreciate it. Please check it out. And see you in the next Food for Thought. Bye. I read somewhere that humans sorry. Moving with Seth, your YouTube channel?
Move with Seth. Yeah.
Move with Seth.